All right. Coming in kind of hot this morning. On the run. Everybody good with the book? I don't see any new faces necessarily. We are on lesson 7, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Just talked to Todd. Appreciate Todd filling in last week. He said y'all were a talkative group last week. I'm going to take his word for it. I'm going to expect the same this week. But he said y'all were a talkative group this week. You know, we haven't read. A lot of times we don't read the selections, and this one is they're very long in this particular study. Most of them are very long, and they are things we're pretty familiar with. So I've kind of skipped over the reading a few times, but I hope you get a chance to read them before you start in here. But the first thing I thought of when I saw the lesson was Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. My first thought was, what am I going to do different with Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz? Because we have studied it, we have had sermons on it, we have had lessons on it over and over again. Stan, if I'm not mistaken, didn't we do it on Wednesday night not long ago at all? Yeah, like yeah, 1 or 2 nights, and maybe it's been 2 months. Exactly. And I remembered it, so Stan, of course, went over it in detail, So first thing I thought of is I can't necessarily sit up here and tell the story of Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz because, man, have we really talked about them. So going to try to come up with some things that we can apply, and we always can. Just reading the story, you can come up with some things to apply to your life. But going to try to come up with some other things that we can apply to our lives a little bit. It's really been covered a lot. I think one thing, what we're going to concentrate on, and as we go through the lesson today, maybe you can keep this in the back of your mind. We want to be the kind of people that Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz were. This isn't just a story about these 3 people, and there's other people involved too. There's Arpa, there's lots of other people involved in this story, or several other people. But these are obviously the 3 main characters. This isn't just a story about them and their lives necessarily. It's in the Bible, I think, for a reason, and it's a great story. But I think we can all agree that Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz were really good people and had some really redeeming qualities. How can we be like them? That's a good way to look at this lesson. How can we model our lives a little bit anyway after these 3 people? Take things from all 3 of them's life. They're all different. They all had some different strengths and different qualities. What can we do to be like these people? God felt that it was important enough. God felt that this story and these people were important enough to do what? See if you can read my mind this morning. I like it. Get y'all start off reading my mind. God thought it was important enough to put, especially Ruth, particular, in what? The lineage of Jesus, right? He thought these people were important enough, and this story, the way it played out, was important enough to put Ruth and Boaz in the lineage of Jesus, in first David and then on to Jesus. So that's a big deal, and we always talk about it, and we'll bring up the fact that Ruth was what? A Moabite, So that's a big deal. That's a big deal. God thought enough of these people to put them in the story or the lineage of Jesus in some way anyway. So it's a pretty big deal. So we're going to try to be. How can we be the kind of people that these people are, and what qualities do they have that we could maybe copy? All right, that we could look at. And I think Naomi gets overlooked just a little bit. So we're going to talk maybe a little more about Naomi. Ruth and Boaz are probably the central characters, but Naomi's pretty close. We're going to look at Naomi just a little bit more today. The thing that come to me as I studied this lesson was Naomi was the kind of person that drew people to her, okay? Now, I don't know about all people, but Naomi had a quality that made Ruth say what? I'm going to stay with you. I'm not going to leave you. Naomi inspired loyalty in at least Ruth and maybe some more people. Now, You can argue, possibly, if you want to argue that point, you may say that says more about Ruth than it does about Naomi. Maybe you could maybe make that point that maybe it says more about Ruth than it does Naomi. But I don't believe that necessarily. I believe Naomi was the kind of person that made Ruth say, "I'm going to stick with you. I'm going to be loyal to you." Okay. What do we read in the New Testament about Jesus? If I am lifted up, what will happen? I will draw all men unto me. Okay. How can you be the kind of person that draws people to you? I'll use the word people because you know what I mean, men and women. How can we be the kind of person that draws people to you like Naomi did and makes people want to say what? I don't care that this is my homeland. I don't care that this is where I'm from necessarily. I want to do what? I want to go with you. I want to go with you, okay? I want to go with you and back to your homeland, okay? So Naomi was that kind of person that inspired loyalty, and Ruth had that loyalty. We're going to talk about the loyalty of Ruth as well. So Naomi's quality, they all had. I'm sure they had many other qualities besides this, but Naomi had the quality that drew somebody to her, that made somebody want to be around them. How can you teach people about Jesus if people don't want to necessarily be around you, okay? If you have the kind of personality or you exhibit the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Personality, but if your outlook or what, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but anyway, attitude, that's it, Jim. Jim gets the star for reading my mind this morning. I always ask y'all to read my mind. The attitude is what I was looking for. If you don't have the attitude that make people want to be around you, how are you going to tell them about Jesus? How are you going to preach Jesus? How are you going to teach Jesus if you don't have that attitude that draws people to you, that makes people want to be around you, all right? And Naomi at least had some part of that for Ruth to do that. Now, to Ruth, what do we see about Ruth? We can say a lot of good things about Ruth. She was hardworking. We see, when she goes back to Bethlehem with Naomi, she's gleaning the seed that gets thrown to the side and everything. A lot of things we can say about Ruth, but one thing we can say about Ruth is she's loyal. Okay, and loyalty is a great quality. Loyalty is a great quality. Loyalty says what? When things are going bad, what do? You stick it out. That's right. You stick it out. When things are going bad, you stick it out. Okay. The first thing that goes wrong, you don't say what? I'm jumping over here. I'm going over here. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And folks, we see that all the time in work, in church, in family, in friends. We see people who at the first sign of trouble, what? Jump ship, Doty. That's right. First sign of trouble, they jump ship. Okay? And that is, I don't think that's the kind of quality that's going to draw people to you necessarily. Okay? Things might be better over here. Things might be better, whatever. Different job, different church, whatever. Things might be better. But what have you got? What have you done over the last some years? You've invested in where you are. You've invested in a church. You've invested in a job. You've invested in a person. You've invested in a friendship. And jumping ship might be the easier thing to do. But there's a lot to be said for loyalty and for sticking it out and for being there when somebody needs you. And that's the kind of person Ruth was. And you put Naomi and Ruth together, and you've got this perfect combination of Naomi's drawing people to her. Ruth wants to be loyal. Okay. Now, I'm telling you this about these people without telling you the story because once again, you got to read the audience, and my audience knows the story. Okay. So, what about Boaz? Once again, a lot of things you can say about Boaz, but what's something that Boaz does? And don't worry if you don't have the same thing in mind I do. That's okay. Just tell me some of the things about Boaz. Just from your knowledge of the story, what would you say some characteristics of Boaz are?
He was fair.
Fair, okay. Compassionate, fair. We're going to talk about the fair Jim. He wants to marry Ruth, but what does he got to do? He's got to run it by the next person in line first, okay? He's definitely compassionate. He feels this compassion, okay? Okay. he had a high standing in the community, okay? He had a high standing in the community. Very good. Yeah, we're going to talk about that, Kenny. Let's don't go overboard on Boaz. Because what? He liked the way Ruth looked too, okay? So there's no, and that's exactly right. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's exactly right. Yep. 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 Yeah, yeah. And that's what I was, that the integrity is a good word, obviously, Stan, to describe Boaz. The word I had was personal responsibility. That's what I was, he's a man of personal responsibility. He understands that what has to happen here with Ruth and Naomi. Even though he likes her, Kenny, you're exactly right. Even though he likes her, but somebody's got to what? Somebody's got to take care of her too, you know. Somebody's got to take care of her. And that's what he sees. You know, that's what he sees. I think that played a role as well. Now, Kenny's right. If he didn't like the way she looked, I don't know if he would have still done it or not. I don't know that. But I do know that part of it, I think, was personal responsibility. So Boaz was a man of personal responsibility. We take our responsibilities seriously, and we fulfill our responsibilities, all right? And once again, that might not always be easy. Might not always be easy. All the things, all these qualities that I've talked about with these three people, they're not always easy. It's not always easy to be the person people want to be around like Naomi, because what? We have bad days, all right? We have bad days, and we don't always, Jim used the word attitude, we don't always exude that attitude that we should, you know. But we need to do it more times than not, and we need to do it consistently. So that's not always easy. It's not always easy to be loyal like Ruth, like I said. Sometimes the grass looks greener, and sometimes it is greener. But that doesn't mean you give up on the people you've invested in, okay? And Boaz, personal responsibility. You know, Boaz was somebody said a man of high standing in the community, you know. He didn't have to take on the responsibility of Ruth and all these things. You know, he could have said, what? I don't have time for that. I'm busy. I don't have time for that. But he was a man of integrity, and he was a man of personal responsibility. So that's how I wanted to start today. As we go through the story, I wanted you to think about the three qualities of these people. How can we be more like these three people? How can we use their characteristics to improve our lives as we go through and we see the story? Now, Kenny, they're not perfect people. They're humans. They have flaws and they have mistakes and they do these things. So I don't want to set them up as. Right. I'm glad you said that. He was a man of integrity. That's right. That's right. That's right. He saw a duty there. That's exactly right. All right. Now, hopefully you've been formulating some thoughts as I've been talking here. What have you got to say about these three people?
Who set all this up?
Well, I don't know what answer you're looking for, Doty. Short answer is God. That's why, and I was going to talk about God's hand, but what were you going to say?
I'd say maybe God influenced Naomi because
Yeah.
he's the one that set all this up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I've got that in my introduction. You can see, with all these events, what can you still see? The hand of God. You can still see, Doty's right, you can still see the hand of God in all these things that set up. I do not believe, Doty, and once again, it's not actually said in there, I don't believe for a second that all this happened by chance, you know. I just don't believe it. I don't believe all this happened by chance. I believe that God's hand was a part of this, you know, was a big part of this. Was not what? No, that's right. No. You wouldn't think so. No, I wouldn't think so. And when I said these people aren't perfect, we get a glimpse into Naomi being not perfect, right? She's bitter. I think bitter is the word. That's right. Who could lose Who could lose a spouse and 2 sons and not feel those things, you know? They would almost have to. You would almost have to. Yeah, add that in there too. Yeah, yeah. She said, I can't remember, I didn't write it down, but you all are going to know what I'm talking about, and some of you may can quote it. God has dealt with me harshly. I believe that's what she says, maybe. Something like that. It's something along those terms. She tells Ruth, and she says, God has dealt with me harshly, you know, and that's the way she feels. She really feels that. She feels that bitter, and like I said, I'm not sure the Bible uses the word or any word that's translated into bitter, but you can see that a little bit. You can see a little bitterness there in Naomi. Okay. Yeah, and Naomi means what? It's hope or something. It's exactly the other way. Yeah, she basically didn't. I don't know about legally, but she changed her name. She told her friends to call her this name that meant, you know, yeah, misery. Yeah, exactly. Anybody else that's good about these 3 people? Anything else about these 3? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She just says 3 or 4 different things, but one of them is your God will be my God.
Right.
And I would believe that Naomi has taught Ruth. I mean, she's from Moab. She's a pagan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but now she is, and when she gets to Israel or Bethlehem, it's obvious that she's a worshiper of the true God. Well, something's convinced her of that. And so I'm just saying, we're talking about some good people.
Yep.
But how did they get to be good? I think that you have to go back to their relationship with God and see that that's influenced communities.
Yep. Exactly.
Why is a man like Boaz, why does he live that way? Well, a lot of times it's because of the faith.
Yeah, there's no other explanation for Ruth's faith other than Naomi, or maybe Naomi's, the whole family. Right. Yeah, exactly. So, and that is one of the things in her, and it's, I won't read it, but you can if you want to. It's on page, it's verse 16 and 17 on page 16 there. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. So she had that faith. She had that faith through Naomi. Okay, and you all know people like this. That's another thing I want you to think of. You all know people like this, and I'm thinking of a couple, and I'm not going to call them out, and they're not necessarily church people, but they are, but not necessarily here. But there are plenty here that fit the same bill. You all know people. When I say something about people who draw people to them, and people who you know have this, not a following's a bad word. We kind of think of that as a cult or whatever, but that's not what I mean, of course. But you all know people who draw people to them. You all know people who have this ability to just make people want to be around them and want to listen to them and make friends wherever they go and all this kind of stuff. So you know people like that. And so we can, like I said, we can try to model that. And like Stan said, another thing to model is teaching about God, teaching about Jesus, teaching about God. And back to my point, we can't do that if people don't want to be around us. That's a bad way. I don't know another way to say it. You know, that's a bad way to say it. But we can't influence people for good if they don't want to be around us to begin with. You know. So, any other good thoughts, good comments? Anybody else? Anybody else on these 3 people? Well, let's look at a couple of things I marked for us to read. The first one is on page 68, and this is part of the introduction. This is the last, once again, you don't have to find this. This is the last verse No, I'm sorry. This is in the second full paragraph. It's the last 4 lines there. Just some things. When I read this, I see some things I think that we need to bring out. Whereas Naomi left her homeland due to famine, Ruth left her homeland out of devotion. Death separated Naomi from her husband and sons, but it did not destroy her family. Ruth refused to leave her alone. So Naomi was forced to leave her homeland. Ruth made the decision to leave her homeland. What did Naomi tell both Ruth and her other daughter-in-law? Go back. Yeah, go back. In other words, Ruth's saying, well, it's still better where you are. You go back to my homeland. I don't know what's going to be there waiting for me. I don't have, I can't promise you riches or wealth. Stay here or go back. Naomi was trying to do what was best for them, and Ruth even fought that off. Fought that off. So I think that's pretty interesting. And then let's look. Okay, we're going to talk about, as you can see on page 68, the title of the little section there is deaths, and we all know what that's talking about. That's talking about Naomi's husband. It's talking about her 2 sons. That's what that's talking about there, and that's what led to all this. Somebody said earlier that's what led to all this was these 3 men dying is what led to this story. So I want to read. This is the last paragraph right there on page 69 under the section that says deaths. It said, sadly, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, just like Ruth was. So the woman survived her 2 sons, and her husband survived without them. Because of our expectations, the last statement is especially heart-wrenching. If death must occur, we expect it to occur in particular order, but such is not always the case. Those who are younger and stronger do not always live longer than those who are older and weaker. Naomi learned this truth firsthand, as did Orpah and Ruth. Death is no respecter of age. All 3 women were widows, and that sets up the story right there. We don't always know what to expect. We're not promised good times. Naomi was a little bitter, and we talked about that, and we talked about why. But we're not always promised, good times. We're not promised a long life. We're not promised wealth. You can just go down the list. Or we're not promised health, wealth, long life. None of those things are guarantees. None of those things are guarantees. And they all hit Naomi pretty quick. They all hit her kind of like a sledgehammer. She went from living in Bethlehem, I assume, for a certain period of time under what we would call normal circumstances, with food and normal circumstances. And within a fairly short period of time, I don't know exactly how long, but in a fairly short period of time, she had to move because of a famine, and she lost her husband and her 2 sons. And that's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow, and it affected her. Oh yeah, she don't know what to expect. Stan, she could come home and starve. She could come home and starve. She has to make do, and Ruth helps her obviously because Ruth's there, but she don't know what to expect. So I don't think she ever lost her faith. This is just my opinion from reading the story. I don't think she ever lost her faith. Was she bitter? Yes. Did she maybe blame God a little bit? If you can, all we can do is read what is written. We can't actually talk to her. But if you read what is written, I believe she actually says, God has dealt harshly with me, So, but in saying that, what do you see out of that statement that God has dealt harshly with me? That's right. She still believes God, She still has that faith in God. She just has not exactly happy with the way He's dealt with her, over that time. So she didn't lose her faith. She was down, as any of us would be in that circumstance. Okay, so now we've got the 3 widows. There was no bread. There was no bread in her homeland, so she had to move. We all know that. The husband and the sons appeared to die fairly quickly, fairly quick order. I don't know exactly the time frame on that. So here is Naomi now in this foreign land, now without anybody to take care of her. Her homeland, she don't know what's going back. Why does she go back, by the way? Anybody know? I just read a little bit that she's hurt. Yeah, she's heard the famine's over. So she's heard the famine's over. So maybe there's stuff there. At least she knows people there. At least she has some family there, some distant family that she can go back to. Somebody find Ruth 1:7. It's not in our selection today. It cuts off in verse 5. Somebody real quick, if you can, find and read Ruth 1:7 for. Wait a minute. Let me make sure that's right. I think that's right. No. Yeah, read 7 for sure. Okay, go ahead and read 8, please. Go ahead and read the next one. Yeah. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, that 8's in our text, yeah. No, but that is why I had you read that. We see, it looks unusual, we see the two daughters, and that's exactly why I wanted you to read that. We see the two daughters accompany Naomi part of the way. They set out, and then what happens after they set out? Naomi stops them and says, what? That's right, Jody. You all turn around and go back. But like it was customary. That's not unusual. That's not what I don't, after you read verse 7, I don't want you to think they got started out and then they all of a sudden, the daughter-in-laws all of a sudden decided, we don't necessarily want to go. That was tradition. We talk about that in a lot of things. That was tradition. Anybody going on a trip, you go with them part of the way. You see them part of the way. We have similar things in our society a little bit. What do you do for somebody who's taking a long flight? Maybe what do? You drive them to the airport. You drive them to the airport, or you take them somewhere. You see them. When we're getting ready to go, when we go visit our family somewhere off, I'm thinking like when we go see Preston, Cincinnati, Rick and Gail, when y'all go see, family wherever they are, Kayla in Charlotte. I don't know. The night before you leave, what do? You go out and eat, don't you? You do something special, You go out and eat. You kind of have a little send-off, So that's kind of what this is, a little send-off. There's a little send-off. But they are not obligated to keep going with her. And this is when Naomi tells them to turn around and go back. And they decide, and like I said, Ruth decides not to. Orpah. Nothing wrong with what she does, okay? Nothing, let's not make her a villain because she didn't do what Ruth did, Ruth told her what to do, and it kind of made sense, and she made a decision. She made a decision based on the information she had. So nothing necessarily wrong with what the other daughter-in-law did, but boy, what a fascinating statement, like Stan said, that Ruth said, and the things that she did. So here they go now. They're going. They're going back. They're going back to their homeland. Like I said, Naomi felt the hand of God was against her. And I tell you, this week, as I studied this, as I studied this lesson this week, I tell you what I thought of when it said the hand of God was against me. Those of you who were here on Wednesday night, you heard that our brother Tony, I'd say because that's where he sits right there. Tony has fallen again and broken a hip. He has had his leg, so many problems with his leg, with his leg, and now he's fallen, he's broken his hip. And I thought about that when I read that God has dealt harsh with me. I know Tony's got to be down, and I know he's got to be struggling. I can't imagine going through what he has gone through and not being struggling. So we have things, and that's not to minimize anything anybody in here has had. I know a lot of people in here have had these kind of situations. But currently, I thought about Tony and the things that he had been through, and how it just seems like it's just one thing after another, But that's how Naomi felt. She was a little bitter. She was a little, felt like that God had dealt a little harshly with her. But she's still going on. She still has her faith. She's still going on. She still makes the trip, and through Ruth's loyalty, there she is, going with her. So they get back, and you all know kind of the story of when they get back. We're gonna skip on down to Boaz a little bit. he is going to fulfill his responsibility. One thing I was going to say about, let's see, make sure I got it right here. About the women, they had a process. They had a process of what happens when a wife's husband dies. They had and I don't know the exact process. I've heard it, but I don't know that it was a brother, then and it went down the line. And they had something set up to take care of women who'd become widows. Now, in saying that, I will also say this. Women also did not have many rights at the time. They couldn't own land for the most part. We see a little example of that in the Bible, but for the most part, they couldn't own land. Women did not have anywhere near the rights that they have today, and they were, in a lot of ways, mistreated. But one of the ways that they did have set up was to have a hierarchy, I guess you'd call it, of who marries a woman once she becomes a widow. And that's kind of where our story goes to now, a little bit. You've got Ruth, whose husband has died. And I think Jim might have brought this up earlier, or at least alluded to a little bit earlier. What does Boaz do? What's he do? Kenny, he wants to marry Ruth, but what we got to do first? Yeah. He's second in line, right? He's basically second in line. So he has got to go and talk to this guy about marrying Ruth, and he's got to give him the first opportunity. Basically, he's going to say, I'm going to do it if you don't want to, but you have this first responsibility, or first option at this responsibility. And from what I read, at first the guy was kind of okay with it. And what does Boaz do in a way? Kind of not. That's right. That's right, Jody. I like. That's right. That's right. Yeah. He talks about marrying Ruth, and the guy thinks about it, and he says, "What? But here's what all you got to do. Here's what all you got to do." Okay. That's right. It didn't set so well. Anybody ever made a deal like that before in your life, where you wanted something, maybe somebody else was the first one there, and you said, I don't want to equate a person with like a car or something like that. That's wrong. But you know what I'm saying is that you kind of present some things that lead somebody in another direction. I think Boaz knew what he was doing here. I think he knew what he was doing here. He knew that he was leading this guy. Like Jody said, Jody put it great. He presented him with facts, and they were facts, but he didn't just say when the guy showed some interest with Ruth, he didn't say, okay, fine, I'm done, He kind of made it his way there a little bit, Todd.
Say it or Jay, whatever. It's a lot like the story I told you this morning.
Yeah.
We're having to make some arrangements at my mom's. Well, my mom she's the last of that generation. She's the keeper of the great-grandmother's dining room set.
Yep.
Okay? So I was obligated to call the next person in line.
Yep.
I need this family heirloom to move on.
Yeah.
Boy, don't you think I didn't sell it?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Not physically for money now.
You didn't. Oh yeah. You sold some. You didn't call him. Todd didn't come and say, "Who wants this old table? Who wants this? This thing's falling apart. Who wants this old table?" No, it was what? Family heirloom. This thing's got to be kept. And that's kind of what Boaz did. Todd told me the story up here a minute ago, and I told him it was like our story here, what he was doing, And these are all people Todd and I know. We both know these people. Yes, I think so. Yeah, yeah. He would have to buy some land. He would have to be out some things. Yeah. Oh yeah. He would have to be out some things.
That's complicated. It may not be exactly what you think, but here's my understanding of that. Elimelech and Naomi probably sold it when they left.
Mm-hmm.
But remember,
Under the
law,
yeah.
the longest that new owner could have had it would have been 50 years.
Yep.
That's the very longest, because when the year of
Jubilee. Yep.
it has to go back to the original family.
Yeah.
But family, this redeemer idea comes in.
Mhm.
buy it back
Back.
into their family.
Yep.
Eventually, it would come back in the year of Jubilee anyway, but he's gonna have the right to buy it. When they sold it, it all depended on how close to the Jubilee.
Sure.
Like, you might could buy it for 50 years, but it might be 40 years into that, and
Yeah.
Jubilee's just 10
You're not going to get much for it.
so you only bought it for 10, and if you did, you obviously paid a lot less than
Mhm.
if you bought it for 50. It's complicated.
Yep.
But the law allowed for always, the land had to go back to the original family. That's the way God set it
Yep.
up. When Joshua divided it and gave it to the people, that was the law of God.
And I think I think Boaz used that. You know, I think he.
Well, that's what they're redeeming two things, all their possessions plus and by the way, when we talk about the stuff for the widow, actually that's for the widows who do not have a son
Yep.
to
Yeah.
continue the family.
Yeah.
Naomi
didn't have any. Yeah.
that
No.
because
That's
she
right.
already had two sons.
Yep. And couldn't have any more. That's right.
But now we've got Ruth
Yep.
who's in line, and she doesn't have any children.
Yep.
This kinsman redeemer that they talk about here in Ruth or in Naomi Ruth, is a foreshadowing of
Jesus. Yeah. Jesus. That's right. That's right.
Jesus does for us.
That's right.
He redeems us back
Yep.
to God.
Yep. You can't use the word redeemer without. That's right. That's right.
He died for us. He shed his blood, and that blood allows us to come back to God
Yep.
and be with God.
I like that. That's right, Joe. Foreshadowing. That's exactly right. It leads back to, it goes back to Jesus being our Redeemer. And it's not exactly the same. It's very close. It's very close. That's right. Last thing before I want to read, the applications are pretty good. I want to read those. But the last thing is the funny part, of course. When they come up and they make this deal, how do they solidify the deal? Give them some trade sandals, a sandal. I don't think, and Kim and I talked about it a little bit. What if their feet aren't the same size? Well, my guess is back in those days, people made sandals, period. One or two, I don't know either. Sounds like one, but I don't know.
But it's the weirdest thing because then the fella, unless he's carrying an extra,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the weirdest.
It's the weird, and of course,
I could never decide which one of them took their sandal off for sure.
I thought, I'm like you. I think it's Boaz, but I don't know for sure. Yeah. But that is, of course, you get it. There's no paper. There's no, they have to do something. But who came up with that idea? Dodie, Judy, I was hoping Lucas was here. I was going to ask him if he'd ever brokered any deals, where anybody traded sandals as a lawyer. As a lawyer, Lucas has anybody had him? Has he ever had anybody trade sandals in order to, solidify a deal there? So, right. Maybe. That's maybe. And Dodie brings up an interesting point right there. What had to happen? A lot of witnesses. There had to be witnesses. We read that.
Those witnesses were admonished.
Yeah. You saw that, didn't you? Yeah. You saw it.
So if there was ever a question, they would
Yep.
be obligated to testify. No, we saw it. They traded.
They really did. Somebody limped home, but they traded. Look at the first application. It's hard to think of all Ruth willingly gave up to follow Naomi without thinking about what we must give up to follow Jesus. Selfishness must be set aside. Ruth left behind all she knew. We must leave behind the allurements of the world. Making this point, Jesus said, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." So there's another good application, like Jody made earlier to Jesus. There's another good application of what Ruth gave up to go with Naomi. Second one, the book of Ruth begins and ends with a depiction of Naomi's condition. At the beginning of the book, Naomi was widowed and in need. At the end of the book, she had both provisions and hope. Excuse me. The hand of God was obviously at work throughout the story. This is easily seen from our removed perspective. When one is facing trials, however, God's presence is hard to spot. Our task is to trust God's unseen providence. That's a pretty bold statement. That's not the last sentence. Our task is to trust God's unseen providence. That's a pretty powerful statement. I like that. So we see some things here. The last thing before I actually leave you with a final thought, and it's just a repeat of what I talked about before. The big book, I don't think there's one here. There's this book that y'all get, and then there's a thicker book that's got some other a little deeper questions and a little discussion questions. And I read them and I use what I think applies. And one of them said, how did Ruth's inclusion in the lineage of David and Jesus challenge the traditional ideas about outsiders in God's plan? Okay? Who's God willing to use in his plan? Anyone, Jody. That's right. God's willing to use anyone. That's right. Anybody that put their faith in him. So, you know, if the Jewish people were asked, or possibly, you know, would you want a Moabite woman in the lineage of the Savior, of the Messiah? Their first thought, no, that taints it or whatever, you know. But that's not the case. That's not the case. God uses people for all kind of reasons and all kind of purposes here. You know, Ruth probably didn't know until Naomi and her husband and sons moved over. Ruth probably never heard of the God that we worship, you know. And she goes from that to where she is in her lifetime. And that's incredible. So let's learn from this story. Other than it just being a great story, let's learn to draw people to us. Let's learn to be people of personal responsibility, of integrity, and let's learn to be people of loyalty. Okay, those are all three great qualities that are difficult at times, but all things that can help us and the way we can use this story. Okay, any other thoughts? All right, we're a touch over, but not much. So thank you.